Have you ever heard the sound of your own end approaching? I'm not talking about a metaphor, a vague feeling. I'm talking about a real physical sound. A sound that freezes your blood and makes you understand, in a split second, that the rules of the game have changed and you're no longer in control. For most people, that sound may never come. But for me, a trucker with 20 years of asphalt under my tires, that sound had a name and address: the descent of Interstate 70, deep in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. A stretch of road as beautiful as it is treacherous, which veterans, like me, have nicknamed the Beast from the East. That day, the Beast whispered my name. There are days when you wake up and simply sense danger in the air, like the scent of rain before a devastating storm. But that morning, the sky was clear. The radio was playing an old song, and my steel giant, a companion weighing nearly 40 tons, rumbled softly, devouring the miles. It was my routine, my life. The solitude of the cabin, the landscape unfolding. Like an endless film through the windshield. This is the essence of life on the road. It's a constant dance between man, machine, and destiny. But what happens when your dancing partner, your machine, decides to take you to the abyss? Have you ever been through this? That icy moment when the tool that gives you sustenance becomes the weapon that can take your life? That's exactly what happened. On the first steep incline, my foot went to the brake, an automatic movement done 1,000,000 times. But the response was different, soft, spongy. The truck was slow to respond. My heart, accustomed to the monotonous rhythm of the road, gave a lurch. A silent alarm rang in my head, but I ignored it. It's just you, John, I told myself. But the road doesn't forgive impressions. Around the next curve, the truth hit me with the force of a punch to the gut. I slammed on the brakes, and the pedal sank to the floor. Useless. Silence. No hiss of compressed air. No resistance. Nothing. Just the speed increasing. 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. I was no longer a trucker. I was a passenger in my own runaway. Missile and gravity was my executioner. Panic is a terrible thing. It steals your breath, your logic, your years of experience. I tried engine braking, downshifting with a force that made the engine scream in protest, but the load behind me pushed me toward certain death. Ahead of me, a sign flashed like a final warning. Sharp curve ahead. I would not make that curve. It was impossible. It was there, at the height of despair, with my hands glued to the steering wheel and my eyes wide with terror, that I did the only thing a man can do when technique and strength are exhausted. I screamed. I screamed with all the faith and fear. In my soul, a name. A cry for help to heaven. Stay with me until the end, because what happened in the exact moment after that scream is something that, to this day, neither the engineers nor the highway police have been able to explain properly. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because it's not about luck. It's about an answer that came from the most unexpected place, in a way that defies logic. What you're about to discover now may surprise you, because it's not about luck. It's about an answer that came from the most unexpected place, in a way that defies logic. And it's at this point, at this very limit between hope and the end, that our story connects with yours. Before I tell you what my eyes saw, what happened on that road the second after my cry of despair, I need a moment. Because what I felt there, in that hell on wheels, was a loneliness so profound, it seemed the entire universe had forgotten me. And I know I'm not the only one who has felt this way. If this feeling of being on edge resonates with you, if you've ever found yourself in a hopeless situation and asked for a sign, for help that seemed impossible, leave a comment below with what touched you most in this story so far. Your sharing transforms this space from a simple video into a community. And if my story resonates within you, Your like is like a wave of the hand on the road, a sign that we're together on this journey, even if separated by screens. The truth is, I created this channel to be more than a storyteller. I created it to be a meeting place, a virtual bonfire where we can share the moments that define us. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who, perhaps at this very moment, are going through their own dangerous descent and need to hear that there is hope. When you subscribe, you're not just following content. You're saying yes to more life stories that remind us of our strength and faith. You're helping me keep this fire burning, proving that stories of overcoming obstacles and inexplicable moments deserve to be told. Thank you for listening. I really do. Now, hold on tight, because I need to take you back inside that cabin to the exact second after I screamed. The world outside was a green and gray blur passing by at over 80 miles per hour. My eyes, brimming with tears, focused on the road ahead, waiting for the final impact. And that's when I saw it. What you're about to discover now may surprise you, because it's not about luck. It's about an answer. An answer that came from the most unexpected place in a way that defies logic. But wait, for you to understand the weight, the true impact of what I saw in that green and gray blur, I need to be honest with you. I need to take you to the behind the scenes that day, to the calm that came before the storm, because that's where the hidden truth this story really lives. My name is John, and as I said, the road has been my home for over 20 years. That Tuesday morning was nothing special. It began like thousands of others, with the bitter taste of gas station coffee and the sun slowly rising, painting the Rocky Mountains with hues of orange and purple that would make any artist weep. My steel behemoth, loaded with a load of electronics that needed to get to Denver, rumbled reliably. The road was clear, the sky was blue, and the only thing on my mind was the promise of being home in 2 days, of feeling my wife's embrace and hearing my children's banal stories. That is the day of every truck driver, 1 foot on the accelerator and the heart hundreds of miles away. I knew every inch of that mountain, every curve, every climb, every blind spot. At least I thought I did. That's the trap of experience, isn't it? Confidence turns into complacency. Your mentality goes on autopilot. Have you ever felt that way? In your work, in your routine? You do things so well and for so long that you stop paying attention to the details, to the little signs that something is about to change. That day for me was just another day at the office. An office with the most beautiful view in the world, but still a work day. I was relaxed, listening to music, thinking about the dinner I would have at home. Little did I know that decisions, most criticisms of our lives, are not made in moments of great deliberation, but rather in those moments of distraction, when we let our guard down. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this story isn't just about a truck that lost its brakes. It's about how we, as human beings, lose our brakes in our own lives. It's about how we ignore the little warnings, the little glitches in the system, until it's too late. Life on the road teaches you this. You learn to read the weather, to listen to the engine, to feel the vibration of the tires on the asphalt. It's a constant, silent communication. But that day, I wasn't listening. My mind was on the future, on the finish line, and not on the present, on the here and now of that perilous descent transformation. The most brutal thing usually begins with the breaking of a routine that we considered unbreakable. Think about it. The very fabric of our lives is built on trust. Trust that the ground won't give way, that our hearts will keep beating, that the brakes will work when we need them. And when one of these fundamental pillars breaks, the whole world crumbles with it. It's not just the metal and mechanics that fail. It's your perception of reality that shatters. That day, as I started down I-70, I was a man in complete control of his universe. A universe of 18 wheels, a steering wheel, and a predictable road. Minutes later, I would become living proof that control is the greatest illusion we tell ourselves revelations. The most important things don't come from grand epiphanies, but from the terrifying sound of silence when you expect something to work. And it simply doesn't. It was precisely this silence that preceded the chaos. The first time I touched the brake pedal, I felt that strange softness, that almost imperceptible delay. It was a whisper. A small warning that my mind, numbed by routine, chose to categorize as no big deal. But the road always exacts the price for our inattention. If this idea that the biggest challenges arise when we're on autopilot resonated with you, if you've ever noticed a small warning sign in your life and wondered if you should pay attention to it, write in the comments the day. Transform. This simple truth is the foundation of everything that happened next. Because from that first touch of the brakes, my journey as a simple trucker hauling cargo transformed into something else. My journey from a simple trucker hauling cargo turned into something else. It became a brutal lesson in how fragile normality is and how life can change in the space between the blink of an eye and the slam out of the brakes. It was on the first long descent, where the road slopes and demands respect, that the first shiver ran down my spine. A shiver that I, in my veteran arrogance, tried to ignore. I slammed on the brake to slow down, a mechanical, almost unconscious gesture. And that's when hell sent me its first calling card. The PETA, it didn't offer the familiar resistance, that firm pressure that connects you to the machine's power. It felt soft, spongy, as if I were stepping on quicksand. The truck took a moment longer, a fraction of a second that to a layman would mean nothing, but to me, it was like a muffled scream. The sound of the air brake, that reassuring pshush, sounded anemic. Weak got my heart skipped a beat. Not a jump of fright, but a jump of alarm, that primal instinct we have that modern life teaches us to silence. And I did. Calm down, John, I said to myself aloud, to fill the suddenly eerie silence of the cabin. It must just be your imagination. Maybe a little air in the line, it'll adjust. That's the mentality that brings us down, isn't it? Logic trying to stifle intuition. We take thousands of micro-decisions every day based on this self-confidence. This belief that we know more than our own body is telling us. The hidden truth was that my steel giant was already sick, dying inside, and I was trying to convince him, and myself, that it was just a cold. But the road, my friends, the road, doesn't forgive impressions. It is a ruthless judge of reality. I continued downhill, the steering wheel firmly in my hands, but inside, a seed of panic was beginning to germinate. I tried to focus on the music, the scenery, but my eyes kept riveted on the tachometer, the speedometer needle. Every little bump in the road felt like a push. Every car I passed felt like a potential obstacle. That first shiver had left a mark, a stain on the perfect canvas of that day. Confidence, that pillar that supported my entire life day, was cracked. And the next curve was approaching, a tighter one, which would require more serious braking. That would be the moment of truth. The moment to find out if the first signal was a false alarm, or the siren announcing the end of the world. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this internal battle between denial and acceptance is the true battlefield of life. It is in us behind the scenes. It is in our minds that the most important wars are fought. That moment, for me, was a crossroads. I could have pulled over, stopped to check, lost a few hours, and perhaps avoided it all. But the pressure of surrender, the familiarity of routine, the voice of complacency, all of it pushed me forward. And that is one of the revelations, the hardest things life has taught me. Most tragedies are not born from a single big mistake, but from a series of small wrong choices of ignored warnings, of chills we decided meant nothing, impact devastating. Event is almost always the result of a chain of silent negligence. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as I approached the curve. "Come on, big guy," I muttered, as if speaking to an old friend. "Show me I'm going crazy." I braced my foot, and with my heart in my throat, I slammed on the brake again, this time with more intention, more force. And what happened next was the sound of absolute silence. The pedal went to the floor. No resistance, no noise, no response. It was as if my foot had passed through a ghost. The truck didn't slow down. Quite the opposite, driven by the incline. And its colossal weight, it began to accelerate. Panic was no longer a seed. It exploded inside me like a supernova, burning away all logic, all calm, all experience. The shiver turned into pure, icy terror. Transformation from truck driver to passenger in a runaway missile was instantaneous. That was no longer my truck. It was my coffin. If you understand that the details, the small signs, are the things that matter most before a big change in life, comment here. Intuition SGRMs and mine was screaming. The problem was that, at that moment, the sound of the wind and my own heart hammering in my ears was already much louder, and mine was screaming. The problem was that, at that moment, the sound of the wind and my own heart pounding in my ears was much louder. The curve was approaching. At that point, it was no longer a matter of intuition. It was a matter of pure, brutal physics. I slammed my foot on the brake pedal, an act of sheer desperation. And nothing. The pedal sank to the floor, limp, inert, a phantom limb. Silence, no hiss, no response. Just the growing roar of the wind and the whine of the engine straining at speed. It was in this mechanical silence, in this absence of response, that panic gripped every cell in my body. That last pillar of hope, the last possibility of misperception, had crumbled. The speedometer needle, like a doomsday hand, began its relentless climb. 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. And it kept climbing. The small cars in the next lane, which were once companions of day, became fragile obstacles, life-threatening hazards that I passed as if they were standing still. I saw the frightened face of a woman in the passenger seat of a sedan, her eyes wide with terror as she watched my steel giant whiz by, out of control. The impact, the sight of that look on me was devastating. I was no longer a professional on the road. I was a threat, an imminent danger to every innocent soul around me. My hands, drenched in sweat, pumped the brake pedal frantically, a useless ritual, a prayer to a mechanical god that was already dead. Nothing. I tried the last car to trucker. Has up his sleeve, the engine brake. I downshifted with a violence that made the entire transmission scream in agony, a metallic sound of protest echoing through the cabin. But the weight of the load, my 40 tons of responsibility, pushed me down, a mountain like an unstoppable missile. Gravity was in control. I was just a passenger in my own death machine. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it is at that moment when all the tools, all the training, and all the experience become useless that you discover who you really are. It is the hidden truth of the human condition. We construct our identity, our mentality, based on our ability to control our environment. We control our car, our career, our finances, our routines, and we believe in this illusion. That moment, for me, was revelation brutal. I had absolutely no control over anything. The only thing I had left was my decisions in the space of a second, with death as the consequence for any error. And behind the scenes from that panic, a strange clarity began to emerge. The transformation, it wasn't just from driver to passenger. It was from a man who thought he was in charge to a creature completely at the mercy of greater forces. It's a terribly humiliating place, but also, strangely, a place of pure truth. Back in the cab, the world outside became a tunnel. My peripheral vision faded, focused only on the ribbon of asphalt unfurling before me at breakneck speed. The steering wheel was the only connection I still had to the truck's destination. But where should I point it? Toward the crash barrier, which would mean plummeting down the mountain. Toward the rocky slope, which would mean an explosion of metal and fire. Each option was a different death sentence. The sound of my own blood pounding in my ears was the soundtrack to the end. The air in the cabin grew dense, heavy, as if space itself were being compressed by speed and fear. I glanced at the photo of my family pinned to the dashboard. In that moment, they were no longer a promise of arrival. They were a silent farewell. I had failed. The man who promised to always return. Home was about to break his promise in the most spectacular and tragic way possible. I was alone. Completely and irrevocably alone. Trapped in a steel box I had guided into my own trap. If you've ever felt completely out of control, like you're just reacting while life happens at warp speed around you, write in the comments. Control is an Eilalischen for. It was the acceptance of this frightening truth that paved the way for what happened next. When technique runs out, when strength fades, and logic no longer offers answers, something else must take over. For it was the acceptance of this frightening truth that made room for what happened next. When technique runs out, when strength fades and logic no longer offers answers, something else must take over. That's when I saw it, a sign, green and white, like a guardian angel or a grim reaper. The letters, blurred by speed, came together. For a split second in my mind, hair curve in 1 mile. 1 mile. At that speed, I had less than 45 seconds to live. And I wasn't going to make that curve. There was no way. It was physically impossible. That piece of metal on the side of the road wasn't a warning. It was my tombstone. It was the end. In that instant, 20 years of experience, millions of miles driven, all the maneuvers and tricks I'd learned in day, all of this turned to dust. It was worth absolutely nothing. The hidden truth is that, in the face of death, we are all novices. The panic that had once been a hot blast turned into a paralyzing ice. Exhausted, terrified, defeated, my body continued to operate, my hands glued to the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the road, but my soul had already surrendered. And it was in that place, at the bottom of the pit of despair, that I did the only thing I had left. The last resort of a man who has nothing left. I screamed. It wasn't a scream of rage or fear. It was something more primal, deeper. All sound from the outside world seemed to vanish. The roar of the wind, the groan of the engine, the sound of tires on asphalt, everything was muffled. The only thing I heard was my own labored breathing and the frantic beating of my heart. A war drum announcing the final battle. And with all the strength in my lungs, with all the energy remaining in my soul, I looked up at the ceiling of the cabin and screamed, "Holy Lady, help me. Get me out of here." Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because that cry was not a rehearsed prayer. It was not a calculated act of faith. It was a cry of total surrender. It is a point of transformation that few people reach, that moment when you admit to yourself and to the universe that you can't do it anymore. You let go. You hand over the wheel of your life. And it's fascinating, because our mentality, modern society, teaches us the opposite. We are taught to fight, to persist, to never give up. But what happens when fighting only sinks you deeper? And when the only decision isn't smart to stop making decisions? In behind the scenes, in human psychology, this act of surrender is incredibly powerful. It's the recognition that greater forces are at play, whether you're a person of faith or not. It's ground zero, the reset. That cry wasn't a request. It was a handing over of the keys. I don't know what to do. My part is over. Now it's up to you. Impact verbalizing this defeat is one of the revelations most liberating that a human being can experience, even if it happens seconds from death. Even as the words echoed in the cabin, something shifted. Not in the truck, not on the road. Something shifted within me. A strange, almost supernatural calm began to settle over the panic. It was as if, by admitting my helplessness, I had freed myself from the weight of the responsibility to save myself. The fight was over. I was just leaving. I accepted my fate. I looked at the photo of my family again, but this time not with the despair of parting, but with a calm love, a gratitude for the years I had. Death was no longer a monster to be fought. It was just the next inevitable bend in the road. And it was in this state of acceptance, of complete surrender, that my now calm eyes registered something ahead. Something that hadn't been there a second before. Or maybe it had been, and my panic simply prevented me from seeing it. A detail, an anomaly in the landscape that was about to change everything. If you believe that in our weakest moment, when we finally surrender, is when we find our greatest strength or unexpected help, comment here, surrender FREs, because this liberation from ego, from the need for control, was what allowed me to see what was right in front of me all along. A path that wasn't on my mental map of that road, because this release of ego, of the need for control, was what allowed me to see what was right in front of me all along. A path that wasn't on my mental map of that road. And then it happened. Amidst the green blur of trees, in that tunnel of visual panic, something opened, like a tear in the fabric of reality. A brown and gray clearing, a gravel rise that seemed to appear out of nowhere on the side of the road. A truck escape ramp. And it wasn't just there. It was perfectly aligned with my trajectory, as if it had been placed there at that very second. For me, my eyes fixed on it. The world stopped for a split second. That was my lifeboat in the middle of the ocean of asphalt. Now, you need to understand something. I had driven that stretch of I-70 hundreds, maybe thousands of times over the course of 20 years. I knew the official emergency ramps, the rest areas, every sign. But that one, I swear to God, I had never noticed that ramp in that exact spot. It didn't exist in my universe. In my intimate knowledge of that day, it was as if she had appeared. As if my prayer, my cry of despair, had received a physical, tangible answer made of dirt and gravel. Without a second thought, without a single logical thought, driven by an instinct older than reason itself, I threw the steering wheel with all the force I had. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened there wasn't just an act of luck. It was a lesson in perception and mentality. A hidden truth is that, often, the solution to our biggest problems is right in front of us, but we simply can't see it. Why? Because our brain, especially under stress, develops tunnel vision. It focuses on the problem, the threat in my case, the death curve. My entire being, all my mental energy, was focused on that catastrophic endpoint. But in the moment of surrender, the moment I accepted the end, my focus broke. That tunnel vision opened. And by stopping looking for the problem, I was finally able to see the solution. This is one of the revelations most powerful over human nature. The transformation. It doesn't happen when we find a new strength, but when we change what we are. Looking for us behind the scenes from our consciousness, we constantly filter reality. We ignore 99% of what's around us to focus on what we deem important. That cry of "get me out of here" wasn't just a cry for help. It was a command to my own mind. Stop focusing on death and look for a way out. And my mind obeyed. Was the ramp always there? Or was it a cosmic coincidence? Honestly, The answer doesn't matter as much as the impact of the lesson. The lesson that the most important decisions are not those we make after long deliberation, but those that arise from pure intuition when we are completely open. Turning that steering wheel wasn't a choice. It was a consequence. The consequence of a mind that finally stopped fighting and began to see Dot back in the brutal reality of the cabin. My arms screamed in pain from the force required to turn that giant at over 80 miles per hour. The tires protested with a high-pitched, desperate screech, the only sound that managed to break through the wind. The truck tilted dangerously, and for a second, I thought it would roll over, but it obeyed. It crossed the road, aiming directly for the entrance to that saving ramp. I was aiming for a portal of hope, a spit of land that promised friction, deceleration, life. That movement, that turn of the steering wheel, was the highest bet of my life, and all in on fate. And as the truck left the smooth asphalt and prepared to meet the coarse gravel, I knew the next few seconds would define everything. The sound was about to change drastically. If you believe that, often the solution to our biggest problem is right in front of us, but our focus on the problem prevents us from seeing it. Comment here, the answer was T-Shi Aribi, because what I was about. To feel was no longer the speed of despair, but the raw, violent force of salvation. Because what I was about to feel was no longer the speed of despair, but the raw, violent force of salvation. The impact was brutal. The instant the front tires touched the gravel, it was as if a giant's hand had grabbed my truck. The sound changed instantly. The high-pitched howl of the wind was replaced by the deafening scream of a million rocks being dragged, crunched, and thrown against the underside of the chassis. It was the sound of friction, the sound of physics in its rawest, most desperate form, fighting against inertia. The cabin, already shaking with fear, now convulsed with a violence that tossed me from side to side like a rag doll. Everything that wasn't nailed down flew. My coffee, my clipboard, the maps, everything became a whirlwind of chaos. I gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought it would break, not to drive, but to anchor myself to reality. The truck was sinking into the coarse gravel, its speed dropping sharply and painfully. 80, 60, 40, 20. The seconds stretched out, turning into an eternity of noise and judder. And then nothing. Silence. A silence so profound, so absolute, it hurt my ears. A silence that screamed louder than the engine, louder than the rocks, louder. And my own scream of despair seconds before. The truck was stopped, tilted upward, buried up to its axles in the gravel. Outside, a cloud of brown dust slowly settled, like a curtain falling at the end of a tragic act that, miraculously, had not resulted in tragedy. And I stood there, my hands still glued to the steering wheel, my entire body trembling with the rush of adrenaline. I was alive, trembling, covered in sweat, but alive. I breathed, my first conscious breath in minutes. And then the dam broke. I lay there, my forehead pressed against the cold steering wheel, and wept. They weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of pure, overwhelming relief. The cry of a man who had looked death in the eye and somehow escaped. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because we all prepare for the crisis, but no one prepares us for the silence that comes after. This is the true moment of transformation. A hidden truth of survival is that the impact real doesn't happen during the fall, but the moment you realize the ground didn't break you. In that silence, inside that dusty cabin, my mentality 20 years of road was demolished and rebuilt. The priorities, the fears, the desires, everything was reordered. And behind the scenes in our lives, we accumulate so many worries, so many unnecessary burdens. An overdue load, a bill to pay, a silly argument. In that silence, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the air flowing in and out of my lungs. That's the big revelation that the near end brings us. The simplicity of life. It's a universal experience, even if the details change. It could be the silence in a hospital waiting room after news, the silence at home after a great loss, or the silence in the car after a near crash. In those moments, the day of life reveals itself, not as a straight line of achievements, but as a series of precious moments of still being here. Decisions, things that seemed so monumental hours before, fade into insignificance. And a new perspective is born from the ashes of the old. I was no longer John the trucker, worried about deadlines. I was just John, a father, a husband, a man given a second chance without understanding why or how. That gravel didn't just stop. A 40-ton truck. It stopped time and forced me to look at what truly mattered. That cry at the steering wheel wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the baptism of a new man. If you've ever lived through a moment of intense crisis and then felt the overwhelming peace of the silence that comes afterward, the relief of simply still being here, comment here, the silence of the second. CHNC, and in that deafening silence, as the dust settled outside and inside me, a single question began to form. A question that would change everything I thought I knew about luck, faith, and the roads of this life. And in that deafening silence, as the dust settled outside and inside me, a single question began to form. A question that would change everything. I thought I knew about luck, faith, and the roads of this life. How? How was that ramp there? Exactly where I needed it? Exactly when I needed it? I stood there for an incalculable amount of time, until the sound of approaching sirens tore through. The silence. Soon, a highway patrol car pulled up on the side of the road, and an officer got out, walking cautiously toward me. I climbed out of the cab, my legs still shaking, and stood there, outside, just staring at the ramp, at that spit of land that had embraced me. The cop, an older man with a face weathered by time and sun, looked me up and down and said in a tone of someone who'd seen it all, "Boy, you're so lucky. Lucky as big as Texas." I just shook my head, still dazed, and pointed to the ramp. I've never seen this ramp before," I said, my voice hoarse. "I know this road like the back of my hand. I've never seen it." The cop frowned, looked at the ramp, then at me, and then pointed to a spot a little further down the road, behind where I'd come from. And then came the shock, the real revelation which made the ground disappear from under my feet for the second time that day. He said, "Of course you didn't see it. The main emergency ramp, the one everyone knows, is half a mile back. You went right past it." My brain struggled to process the information. Had I passed the official ramp? In my panic, hadn't I even seen it? But if so, where was I? The officer continued, his calm voice contrasting with the storm brewing inside me. "This one," he said, pointing to my salvation, "is an old service ramp, almost decommissioned. It's blocked by a concrete barrier year-round." He paused, looking at the ramp entrance, where there was no barrier at all. And then he uttered the sentence that echoes in my mind to this day. "It turns out a maintenance crew was here yesterday morning. They removed the barrier to do a routine inspection of the gravel, and they forgot to put it back." He shrugged. "They forgot." Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this is where the story stops being about an accident and becomes about the fabric of the universe itself. They forgot. Such a banal human word. A mistake, a failure, a small oversight on an ordinary workday. But the impact of that word, that forgetfulness, was the difference between life and death. For me, the hidden truth here is much more complex than a simple miracle. A miracle is something you can't explain. But this had an explanation so unlikely, a chain of coincidences so perfectly aligned that it becomes even more unbelievable than an act of God. Think about the behind the scene of this. A supervisor decides to inspect that particular ramp that day. The crew removes the barrier. They finish the job. And for some reason, a distraction, a conversation, a lapse in memory, they simply walk away, leaving the road open. Open for less than 24 hours. Open just as a lone trucker loses his brakes and screams for help. That transformation from the inexplicable to the coincidental is almost more shocking. It forces a shift in mentality. It's no longer a question of, did God intervene? The question becomes, does the universe conspire? Decisions of strangers, their little flaws, their forgetfulness, can they create an invisible safety net for us? This day taught me that perhaps faith isn't about believing in magical interventions, but rather recognizing the pattern in chaos, recognizing order in disorder. That forgetfulness wasn't a mistake. For me, it was the answer. An answer delivered by human imperfection, which somehow makes it all the more sacred and mysterious. I wasn't saved by an angel with wings. I was saved by a tired worker who forgot to do one last thing at the end of his shift. And that idea is so overwhelming, so full of beauty and mystery, that it leaves me breathless to this day. If you've ever experienced a coincidence so perfect, so improbable, that it made you question the nature of reality and chance, comment here. The pattern in CHAOS, because looking at that police officer and that forgotten ramp, I understood that the road of life is much stranger and more interconnected than we could ever imagine. And the lesson I learned from that changed not only the way I drive, but the way I live. For, looking at that police officer and that forgotten ramp, I understood that the road of life is far stranger and more interconnected than we could ever imagine. And the lesson I learned from that changed not only the way I drive, but the way I live. I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, that the man who climbed that mountain that morning, confident and a little arrogant in his routine, was not the same man who came down. That John died somewhere between the scream of despair and the silence of the gravel. The man who returned to the road days later was a different man. Quieter, more attentive, more grateful. Some people, when they hear this story, call it luck. Others, more skeptical, call it an incredible coincidence. Me? I call it an answer. That day, I learned the hard way that when you reach your absolute limit, when all your strength, experience, and intelligence are exhausted, something greater can take the wheel. You can call it God, the universe, synchronicity, chance. The name doesn't matter. What matters is the humble recognition that we are not in complete control. And that's not a scary idea. It's a liberating one. The road didn't just provide me with my livelihood for 2 decades. That day, it gave me a second chance. And it taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage isn't fighting to the end, isn't gripping the steering wheel tighter. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is knowing when to ask for help, when to let go and admit, I can't do it anymore. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this lesson goes far beyond a life or death situation. On a highway, it applies to every aspect of our lives today. Think about us behind the scenes of your own life. How many times do we insist on carrying a weight alone, whether in a relationship, a career, or an internal struggle? Our mentality is programmed to value independence and self-sufficiency. Asking for help is often seen as a sign of weakness. But hidden truth, what I discovered on that mountain, is that true strength lies in vulnerability. True strength lies in recognizing our limits and having the courage to reach out, whether to a friend, a family member, or something bigger than you. Believe in impact of this change in perspective is the transformation deepest we can experience. As decisions from that day on The most important things in my life were no longer based solely on logic and experience. They began to include a new factor: intuition, attention to small signs, the humility of knowing that I don't know everything. That was the great revelation. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And part of that mystery is our connection to each other, the invisible ways one person's actions can impact another's life. That anonymous worker's forgetfulness was my miracle. Perhaps an act of kindness from you, a word of encouragement, a simple "good morning" you don't even remember saying, was the forgetfulness that saved someone's day, that opened an emotional escape hatch for someone who is on the brink of their own precipice. We are each other's forgotten angels. Since that day, I've driven differently. I pay attention, not just to the sounds of the engine, but to the details of the landscape, the sky, the people in the other cars. I'm no longer in a rush to arrive. The journey itself has become the destination. The road has ceased to be merely a means to an end and has become a constant teacher, reminding me with every mile of the fragility of life and the unexpected beauty that can emerge from chaos. A man who descended that mountain learned to value the gravel as much as the asphalt, for both are part of the path. If you believe that our greatest strength is often revealed precisely when we have the courage to admit our weakness and ask for help, write in the comments the courage to be violiniere and this new way of seeing the road, of seeing life, led me to one last thought, one last connection that I need to share with you, because it ties all of this together in a way that you might not be expecting. For, looking at that police officer and that forgotten ramp, I understood that the road of life is far stranger and more interconnected than we could ever imagine. And the lesson I learned from there changed not only the way I drive, but the way I live. This new way of seeing the road, of seeing life, led me to one final thought, one final connection that I need to share with you, because it ties it all together in a way you might not expect. I never knew the name of the man or woman on the maintenance crew who forgot to replace that barrier. I never saw their face, but their small mistake, their act of forgetfulness, was my miracle. Their failure was my salvation. And it made me think, how many times in my own life have I unknowingly been someone else's forgetfulness? How many times has a small decision of mine, a kindness I don't even remember making, or even a mistake, had an impact dominoes and day from a complete stranger? That was my story. Dramatic, specific, with the smell of diesel and the sound of gravel. But I know I'm not alone. I know, with all the certainty in my heart, that you who are listening to me now have a story too. Maybe it doesn't involve a 40-ton truck, but I guarantee it involves the same weight on your heart. Maybe it was a situation where an impossible coincidence changed the course of everything. That unexpected encounter, that call that came at just the right time, that document that appeared out of nowhere. Or maybe it was a miracle moment. That event that defies logic and makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about how the world works. We all have those moments. They are the hidden truth of our lives, the secret chapters we rarely share, perhaps for fear of not being understood or of appearing crazy. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because these stories are the most important thing we have. They are the map of our transformation, people. They are the ones who prove that life is more than a sequence of days, work, and bills to pay. They are proof that there is something more, a pattern in the chaos, a music behind the noise, and behind the scenes of every seemingly ordinary life. There are these revelations, those turning points that define who we are. And what I realized after nearly dying on that mountain is that keeping these stories to ourselves is a waste. It's like finding a treasure map and putting it away in a drawer. Your story, your forgetfulness that saved someone, your inexplicable miracle, your decision of turning left instead of right that changed his life forever. All of this has immense power. The power of these stories is that they connect us. They remind us that we are not alone in our struggles, our doubts, and our hopes. When I hear someone else's story, I'm not just hearing about their life. I'm learning about my own. Their experience of overcoming adversity may be the key I need for my own crisis. Yours mentality facing a challenge can inspire mine. Each shared story is like a shining light on a dark map, showing other travelers, I've been here. It's hard, but it's possible. Keep going. We live in a world that encourages us to only show the victories, the pretty photos, the smooth asphalt. But true connection, true community, is built in the stories of the gravel, the escape ramps, the moments when we lost control and had to find a new way forward. And that's why this space exists. To be the place where these stories are told, heard, and valued. If you understand that your personal story, with all its twists and turns and inexplicable moments, has the power to illuminate someone else's path, write in the comments, "Our stories connect us," because that's the final truth I've learned. My journey only became complete the moment I decided to share it. And now, I really want to hear yours, because that's the final truth I've learned. My journey only became complete the moment I decided to share it. And now, I desperately want to hear yours. And if you've made it this far, to the very end of the video, thank you so much. Truly, this means our connection was real, that you weren't here just to hear a story, but to feel it with me. If this narrative touched you, if at any point you felt your heart sink and then relief, your like is a silent sign of that. It's our "I understand what you felt" here on the platform. So I know you've made this journey with me to the last kilometer. Leave a comment below writing the sentence, "This message was for me." This way, I will know that my story has found a place in your heart and that we are not alone on this road. And if you feel this is a place for stories that matter, accounts that make us think, feel, and connect on a deeper level, please consider subscribing to the channel. By doing so, you're not just following content, you're joining our community, ensuring you don't miss the next story, which might just be the one you need to hear. Before you go on your way, I've left another video here. It talks about how the decisions of strangers can change our lives in ways we never imagined, and it perfectly complements what we discussed today. Click on it and we'll continue this conversation there. Until next time, and drive safely on the road and in life.